Welcome to PANC Live. My name is Frank Pittman, and I am the Executive Director of the Piano Academy of North Carolina and your host for PANC Live. PANC Live is being broadcast from the teaching studios at the Piano Academy of North Carolina in Durham. The Piano Academy now teaches all lessons online. Our students range from ages 5 to 70, and we teach beginners through the most advanced. My esteemed colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Davis, specializes in teaching early music and keyboard training in both individual lessons and in classroom environments. Her specialties are in teaching piano to adult learners as well as individuals with special needs, including ADHD and ASD. This is the 6th episode of PANC Live. There might be some technical issues along the way. Please be patient if they occur. If an unfortunate technical problem happens during the show, then simply visit the PANC YouTube channel or the PANC Facebook homepage to rejoin the show. The original URL links that many of you received will not be working. So just go back to those pages and click on the live stream link, and you'll be able to rejoin our show if that happens. Feel free to ask questions or make comments during the show. We love hearing from you. Just type your thoughts in the comment section below. Animation here. Or to your right. We will try to address as many as we can. Today's guests are Dr. Dylan Savage and Dr. Kent Lyman, great friends of mine. Dr. Savage is a Bösendorfer concert artist. Wrong one. There we go. Sorry about that. Dr. Savage is a Bösendorfer concert artist, a Capstone Records recording artist, and associate professor of piano at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. He is the author of the recent book, The Transposed Musician, Teaching Universal Skills to Improve Performance and Benefit Life. The book is currently out and can be purchased at the GIA Publications website, which is www.giamusic.com, www.giamusic.com. Dr. Kent Lyman is professor of piano at Meredith College in Raleigh. He is a Steinway artist and has traveled extensively as a performing artist throughout the United States, in South Korea, China, Brazil, and Italy. He has appeared with several orchestras in the Carolinas and Florida and has collaborated with many of the leading musicians in the state of North Carolina and elsewhere. He is the current president-elect of the North Carolina Music Teachers Association. It is my privilege to welcome our first guest, Dylan Savage. Hi, Dylan.
Well, good morning, Frank. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you. Thank you for doing this so early on a Saturday morning, but I think we piano teachers, we work on Saturdays, don't we?
It's true. We're used to getting up, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you so much, of course, for the invitation and for all you're doing with this wonderful show.
Well, I do appreciate that. It is the goal is to be able to just promote piano across the state. As much as possible using the technology since we've been in this COVID environment and this sort of took root. So you're associate professor of piano at UNC Charlotte, which I felt very honored that you asked me to teach in during your sabbatical. So there's a little bit of association that many people may or not know. So you've had quite a bit of experience in teaching piano at higher education. So tell us where you think the future of applied music teaching is going in higher education.
Well, thank you for that wonderful question. It's something that I know many of my colleagues think about a great deal because we keep the student at the forefront of our purpose. That's our purpose, is to help prepare our students to succeed in a life of music. And the future I see in two sections. It's never looked brighter, and yet there are some dark clouds that also are on the horizon. So let me look at first the brightness. We never have had more wonderfully prepared professors, teachers than ever in the past. It used to be that you would go to big cities, you would go to major, conservatories and things to get the best teaching. But nowadays, because there are so many schools turning out so many wonderful musicians and highly qualified, you can find teachers not only at universities, of course, but in private academies like your own. And you could teach anywhere, but they're in small towns. So we have a huge preponderance of this wealth of instruction, which then includes creating a tremendous amount of students who love music. And that's something that we spend our life, because we're here doing something because we love it. Right. And there's so much purpose in what we're doing. But we then are asking our students to spend a tremendous amount of their life and time developing something which we call, or working toward a career. And so I'm now looking at the other side, sort of the darker cloud. So we have this amazing sort of preponderance of schools all over the land churning out a tremendous amount of students who have spent most of their life and almost every day working toward improving their proficiency. And so as university professors, I am asking myself, what am I preparing them for? And how am I doing it? And these are the two questions that I said that are very important to our future. So what we all are very familiar with is the Western European conservatory approach, which is how we've all been trained, which is very proficiency oriented. We are working toward getting any student as to the highest level we possibly can, and we go through the sort of the normal, the theoretical, the oral skill training, and of course a tremendous amount of practice at the keyboard, learning, the technical and the musical and the stylistic, all those things. All right. Then they graduate, and they're sort of on their own. And where are they going? Well, I'm going to bring up a couple of numbers. The SNAPS survey, which is a strategic national association, I think, of the schools of music, are basically showing what numbers of their students graduate and go on to a career in music. And 17% only find their way into a career in music at the undergraduate level. At the graduate level, we have around 27%, much higher. But still not a very high number. And of course, a career in music has never been a guarantee. It's always been a struggle for even the very best of students. And we have a lot of new aspects that are going into the training, such as entrepreneurship, this idea of wellness. These are fairly new areas of study in, for example, injury prevention didn't used to be a part of our education, nor did this idea of entrepreneurship, which is teaching students to develop their careers around their strengths, right? And all of the business aspect of things, which really never found its way into a conservatory training. So all of this bodes well, but we still have this issue as we're asking a great deal of students, especially if they're going into finishing an undergraduate degree at 22, 23 years old. What are they doing afterwards? So this then leads me to the reason for my book, which I know I'm sort of segueing into your perhaps the next question. And so why don't I just mention it, which is, what is the purpose of the transposed musician? Well, the title, in a very simple way, tries to make it quite clear. It's this idea of training universal skills in the context of the music lesson. And universal skills are often known also as the life skills what teachers are often referring to. So I'll name some of them, things like problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, communication, patience, and those are skills that are Very, very important to maximizing the student's ability to get the most out of their education. Now, the other aspect of the book is, and it addresses this very real concern, a great deal of our music students do not go on to careers in music as much as they would like to. It's a supply and demand issue. There is a glut of musicians out there. And we have to think about this because as teachers, we don't want to seem like we're only sort of perpetuating our own careers. We're bringing them in and then they go out the door and we say, good luck. I know that we all want much more. So this idea of the universal skill, it's universal in the sense of the skills that they're learning in the music lesson need to be very explicitly told to the student what they can be used in areas outside the music lesson as well. The skills that we have often assumed they will learn, such as problem solving, they do so to some degree in the music lesson, but not nearly to the depth that they would be if they were taught explicitly to have fold these into every lesson to some degree. Now, let me make a point here. If you're a tennis coach and you wanted them to build up their aerobic capacity, I want you to think of the aerobic capacity sort of like you would the universal skill. It's essential, is it not, to playing tennis well. How can you go a 2 or 3 set match, let alone a 5 set match, and not have aerobic capacity? Now, you're going to develop aerobic capacity if you run around the tennis court playing tennis. And of course, the coach is then working on all of the aspects of the backhand and the forehand and and the serve. But if the aerobic capacity is not taken out and spoken of in a very specific way and having a regimental training process for that skill in itself, the student will not maximize their ability in the tennis court because they'll run out of steam in a long match. Now, so not surprisingly, the sports world has specific coaches just for aerobic capacity, which entails a training program outside of the swimming pool, off the tennis court, just like core training. Core strength training is absolutely essential. Yeah. So I want you to think of problem solving as patience and focus as these essential components that have to be taught at a much greater level, more comprehensive and more systematic for students to take the most out of their education. Now, secondly, the second part of the book is that not only do I teach these skills within the context of the music lesson, and we can go a little bit more in depth into that, so very step by step, but then the other half of each chapter shows how the student can transpose those skills to life, to that career which they may invariably have, even though they are supremely talented and they love music a great deal. We want them to take the skills that they've learned in the lesson and make them manifest very succinctly and very clearly in their mind to take that problem solving into a job that's not music. And then they can become leaders in their particular profession using problem solving. And let me also say that we know as piano teachers and piano professors that these universal skills are used and applied at the very highest levels. Focus. A piano, a guy who's a student who's playing a concert cannot stop and say, let me regroup. Let me think.
I wish we could.
I wish we could. A surgeon. Now we think of a brain surgeon as somebody, a great deal of focus involved. Yes, indeed. But they can take a moment and look to one of their co-surgeons and address an issue. What do you think about this? Or let's look this up. Let's take a moment so this idea of focus, now this idea of patience is also, how do you teach it? And so the book addresses some of these things that we have always asked our students in a way that to learn these on their own. They get problem solving on their own by sort of trying to solve. But I ask you this question. If you were to throw a student out into the woods to learn survival skills, here's a simple question. Can they do it on their own? Or would they be better served taking a class in the step-by-step how do you filter water? How do you create dry tinder or find it in a rainy day when you desperately need heat? And how can you create that? So some students might stumble on some of these things on their own. And so, as I said, that is the basis for focusing on this, the universal skill training, as I said, and the fact that it is going to be so beneficial to elevating their game as performers. So, as I said, it helps those students who are going to be in this absolutely ultra conservative, competitive world, right, of trying to create a career in music. How do they actually get the most out of their entrepreneurship skills? So when they think of a skill like patience, or they think of a focus, then now steps. So let me then just mention one or two of these. How do you teach focus, for example? Well, when I was studying with the best teachers, that was never spoken about as a skill. It was just, well, you need to focus a little more. It looks like your focus got a little loose at the end of this, Beethoven sonata, right?
Right.
And so I would go back and I would sort of be thinking about this concept of, well, I know what focus is, just like we know what a grain of sand is. We say it's a little kernel of something, but we don't know until we do what? Until we put it under a microscope and we look and we see this grain of sand in a totally different way. And that's precisely what I'm doing with these skills. They need to be made explicitly. So the idea of focus is a working of the brain, and it needs to be exercised like a muscle. And so how do you teach focus? Well, you start with asking the student to try to think about their breath. And can they think about it for 15 straight seconds before their mind wanders? And as we all know, that's a very difficult task. And we know very well that when we are performing, that's when our mind wants to flit about at the most. It seems to be this unruly child. Well, if we start students at a young age sitting quietly and only focusing on the breath for 15 seconds, and then 25 seconds, and then maybe they get to a minute after a couple of months. Remember what happens. A thought comes in that's not on the breath. You push it aside and you focus only on your breathing. As you well know, this is a meditative practice. Mm-hmm. Now, this segues, after they get a sense of what this is, to the idea of music itself. Now, what is music where you can focus upon it? Well, you have to be thinking about something like perhaps audiation. How many students can actually hear their piece go from A to Z all the way through without a single thought intruding? Can they also count out the intervals? For example, this opening interval to this nocturne, it's an octave. And then I'm going to come up to a major third. It resolves to this fifth scale degree, right? And then it goes down to the tonic. Now I'm going to stop. Well, I know the next melody note is an octave above. And I go to the major tonality. Then I hit A twice. Now, focus allows you over years of time to be able to enunciate every chord, every melody note, and be able to audiate this entire thing in your head. So that's what I'm talking about. When you take a skill and you dig down more deeply and you really, now the whole idea of the book also is that all of these are integrated. Problem solving is not separate from focus. Yeah. Creativity is not separate from problem solving. There's a great deal of creativity involved in that process, right? And so I will finish then just by saying that these are skills that have to be constantly nurtured and practiced every day. And the teacher needs to fold these concepts in to the lesson. Now, of course, they're not going to be all at once. A student may have a need. It might be, as I said, the idea of focus. Their problem-solving skills might be pretty good. So you're going to focus on developing a program around getting this mind And there are now remember, there's wonderful parallels, as you well know, to the sports field.
Mhm.
And I can assure you that the top athletes, they have a nutrition coach, they have an aerobics coach, they have a tactics coach, they have one to deal with the pressures, the mental pressures of winning, right? And then, of course, they have one for throwing a ball. They have an offense coach, a defense coach. Okay, well, we as piano teachers, we have to be all those things to our students. But there's a reason why they in athletics have all of those, is because they're attending to all of these separate entities because they're so critical. And so now I hearken back just one more time to this idea that we have so many students graduating in a glutted field. How are they going to be better prepared for that? And as I say, the universal skills are one of those, is a very critical component, which, by the way, I may say this is the very first book to ever take these skills and fold them into the context of a lesson, and also to break them down into a method for teaching them, and then finally for showing the student how they can be used outside the field of music as well.
Well, that's
Okay, so I hope I haven't gone too long.
No. That's perfect. I loved every bit of it because it touches on themes that I also am very passionate about. One of the things that you mentioned at the beginning of your talk was, what trainings do we have at higher education that would prepare a music major to make a living?
Right.
Many students may go into law. Many of my colleagues, when I attended undergraduate, they loved music. They are still active as musicians, but they're currently practicing lawyers and doctors, scientists, and managers of. I mean, I know several friends who went into managerial positions, had absolutely nothing to do with music, but they took their skills they learned through, I guess, necessity, to take the skills and apply it professionally in their chosen area. And
Right.
I mean, there's just but so many slots for professional pianists, piano professors, and one of the things that I have always felt passionate about is, that traditional conservatory training, which brings the young artist in, train them to be duplicates of the master, and then send them forth. Well, we've gotten to a point where our fields are being flooded, but we don't want to necessarily deny art in people's
Absolutely.
lives. And
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say at this very juncture, I wanted to say, but this is truly the good news, is that that Western conservatory approach is absolutely necessary to get you to the highest levels, but it needs to have some adjustments made and certain things integrated into the program. And you mentioned there are books out there that show so many people with music backgrounds have risen to the very highest levels of their careers that are not in music. Why is that? Well, we know just anecdotally, but through our own experience, they're taking these skills that they've learned and they've been patient. They have problem solved. They have learned actually to express themselves deeply as human beings, but they do it through the music. So this ties directly into this ability to communicate. They have become very caring people, and then they become great managers.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
music, as I said, nurtures so many of these aspects in us. Not to mention, as I said, the standard ones that, by the way, the business world just screams for in its employees. This ability to work alone, unsupervised.
Right.
Wow. Well, we're doing this at age 7, for goodness
Right.
sakes. We have this hour lesson, but for the entire week, we go back and we've already started. Now, how do you do this? How do you train for that? Well, music is a great training. So why can't we fold more of this into the actual
I agree.
higher ed and say, what if you came on board to study music for the purposes of having a non-music career?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
That's where I'm going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that, just in my own professional life, I've discovered the ability to take a complex problem, such as a Beethoven sonata. Boy, is that a complex problem.
Sure.
And divide it up into tasks at a variety of different levels, whether it be mental or oral, or analytical, or
Absolutely.
athletically. How
Yes.
do we get through those repeated chords at the beginning of the Waldstein, for example? That's athleticism. You just don't
Yes.
do that coming, as an infant and just being able to do that. So there's so many variety of skills that, speaking as a pianist, now, of course, if you're studying trumpet or clarinet, that could be another show entirely. But
Yes.
since this is specifically piano, I think you're absolutely spot on that we have to address these issues even at the very first level of piano lessons. We don't talk about it sort of as in these academic terms, but we do address certain skills that the student at the beginning, whether it's what muscles, what lever do you use to play a note. I know Marvin Blickenstaff, for example, talks about that when he coaches it, and I think it's just really, really important to have that perspective, which is why I'm so thankful that you have written this book. We have someone who has joined us, or at least made a comment. Our good, beautiful friend Marianne Bills said, "Great thoughts, Dylan. I look forward to studying your book." I do encourage everyone who is in our field to do that. And of course, I would be amiss if my good friend Elizabeth Davis, hello Elizabeth, I hope that you're still there. She welcomes us and says good morning. What a great treat to learn more about both of these musicians. Absolutely. And for anyone else who would like to make comments, please do. In conclusion, Dylan, this has been fascinating because I knew we had sort of a similar perspective, but now I'm absolutely even more intrigued because of the similarity of the way you and I think. But do you have any quick, fun tips for
Sure.
music teachers?
Yes, we could do this very quickly. How would you like to tell your student that you can play faster by playing slower? Now, you may have to think about this. Well, what about decreasing the distance that we lift our finger above the note? And what about decreasing the key dip? We can fire a note by stopping midway. And what if we never lift our fingers off the notes? So actually, we can play faster without having. When we lift a finger above the note, we have to travel all the way to Kansas before we get back to Pennsylvania. And we don't need to travel that far. We can stay here in Pennsylvania when we play. But then you see, this takes time, and to go faster, you have to increase your speed to get through all that distance. So, and then this other tip is, I see so many students trying to play legato when they play fast. Well, you must not try to be thinking about playing legato while you play fast.
The
simple reason is the notes sustain themselves at those speeds. When you play slow, yes, you have to connect. But if you're going, the notes last a certain time frame. So you must pick your finger. You don't have to sit there and stay on the note, which is the enemy of speed.
Yeah, absolutely. You and I are spot on in that regard. Fantastic. Oh, well, this has been absolutely delightful. I do want to encourage people to, I'm going to plug your book one more time, The Transposed Musician, Teaching Universal Skills to Important Performance and Benefit Life. I don't have the title right in front of me. I'm having to look sideways. So thank you very, very much for joining us and talking to us, Dylan. We're going to take a little bit of a coffee break right now for about a minute or so. PANC Live will return with Kent Lyman. So don't go away. Please come back.
Hello, welcome to the Piano Academy of North Carolina. We specialize in teaching piano to all ages and levels. Our students range in ages from 5 to 70. We teach from the absolute beginner to the most advanced.
Due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are teaching all lessons online until further notice. You or your child can take lessons in the safety of your own home.
Lessons at home can be fun and enjoyable. Most lessons are taught through Zoom. If you have an electronic piano, then we will show you how to connect your instrument at home with the pianos at the Academy. Because our instruments are connected, what you play is what we hear.
Email us at info@panc.us.
Everyone deserves the joy of music.
Welcome back, and thanks for staying. If anyone watching is interested in taking online piano lessons, then simply just email us. There's a couple of email addresses. One is info@panc.us, and another one, which is a little bit more easy probably to remember, who knows, piano.academy.nc@gmail.com. So feel free to write to us if you are interested in signing up for online piano lessons. PANC Live is a YouTube and Facebook live show being broadcast from the teaching studios at the Piano Academy in North Carolina in Durham. Remember, we love hearing from you. As you know, two of our great colleagues have written to us, so please leave us comments and questions. It would be fantastic to hear from everyone who's watching. I would now like to invite Dr. Kent Lyman to the show. Good morning, Kent. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Frank. Good to see you. Thank you. I'm great.
Good to see you too. Earlier with Dylan, I sort of made the history as to how Dylan and I had a professional relationship. So I wanted to let the audience know that you and I were colleagues at Meredith College for many years. Our offices were right across the hall from each other. And our professional lives have been connected for quite some time, including a wonderful experience of playing with you in a two-piano work with orchestra, which was so much fun.
Tabuhan.
Yes, absolutely. I still listen to that, our recording of that. So
same here.
Yeah, it's a delight to have you here, and thank you so much for being up and joining us. So now I'm going to turn it over to you a little bit. So I'd like to know a little bit about, how you got interested in piano, your earliest piano memories or childhood experiences.
Okay. Well, thank you again for putting this program together, Frank. It's just, it's inspiring to see how you're marketing the piano community here in North Carolina and really across the world because of our global access. So I guess like most people in my situation, music was very important to me from a very early age. I started piano lessons when I was 7. But one of the more interesting things about my childhood, in 5th grade, we had a teacher at school who was married to a teacher at the high school, lived in a very small town. You grew up there, you went to the same schools and with all your same group of friends all the way through. And this couple had a tradition of asking the 5th grade students to write a letter to themselves, which would then be returned to them when they graduate from high school by the husband who was teaching there. So I wrote that letter to myself and forgot about it. This was in 5th grade. Then in 12th grade, here comes the letter back to me. And among other things, which I am a little embarrassed that I wrote at the time, but one of the things that stood out to me was, I want to be a pianist when I grow up. There was that little 5th grade kid saying that.
Yeah.
And that little 5th grade kid had no idea what he was talking about as far as what does it mean to be a pianist. I think I had in my mind Van Cliburn, who was sort of a household name at that time. And I wanted to be that person. I wanted to be traveling the world, playing with all the orchestras, making records, and being famous and rich. And so, my view of what a pianist has certainly changed over the time, but it was striking to me that I had that ambition so clearly defined at an early age. And I think that's true for most people who try to make a living as a professional musician. It's something they decide on pretty early in life. Yeah.
Yeah. I was at 6th grade when I made the decision. So I was just a year older than your years when that happened. It for many of us it does happen early in our early musical training when that inspiration happens. So you mentioned about you started and lessons and. Obviously, you've had some wonderful teachers. So tell us about one of the influential teachers of your life.
Well, yeah, just to continue the childhood story just a little bit, I mentioned already, I grew up in a very small town, Blanding, Utah, down in southeastern Utah, not far from the four corners of the United States. Very unique place to go. You can stand in 4 states at once, and that was a very regular activity as a child. So anyway, Blanding is a town of 4,500 people. It's been 4,500 people for the last several decades. And there were no real highly trained professional piano teachers in the area. By the time I was about 14, I think, I had outgrown the teachers that were available to me locally. So through a relative who lived up in Salt Lake City, I was able to be connected with my first truly professional level teacher. She was the chair of the piano department at the University of Utah. Her name was Gladys Gladstone. That was her public performing name. Her married name was Gladys Rosenberg, a little 5'2" Jewish lady who was full of fire and passion about music. And I have to say, she is probably one of the most influential teachers I've ever had. It was intimidating for starters, for me and my parents to walk into her home for my first lesson. And because you could tell right away, well, for starters, there's 2 Steinway grand pianos sitting in the living room. And that tells you a lot right there. Wow, this lady's serious. And then she sat down at our first lesson and played Mendelssohn's Spinning Song for me. And she says, maybe someday you'll learn to play this. And I was totally blown away. I was just sitting there watching her little fingers, and she had tiny, tiny hands. And her fingers are almost like transparent, it seemed to me. But she would sit down and play with such intensity. And she also had a beautiful singing voice. And she would do a lot of her teaching from the couch, clear away from the piano. And I would play something. No. Play it like this. And then she would sing the phrase so beautifully. And I go, oh, okay. So, and I'm married to a singer, and I've done a lot of accompanying in voice studios. And it's taken me a long time, but I think I have a pretty good understanding now of the importance of a singing tone in your playing. And I think it started with Mrs. Rosenberg. She was very influential. And I think back on the things I teach today, and I go, yeah, Mrs. Rosenberg was the first one to teach me about that. And I just have an unending debt of gratitude and appreciation for what she taught me.
Well, that certainly ties into the things that we were talking about in the beginning of the show with Dylan about the different skills. And it's obvious that the skills that your teacher shared with you played a vital role in your professional, musical life.
Yes.
But it's also, as someone who loves music and appreciates music, and you listening to other people, you kind of gravitate towards whether or not that lyricism is there. You know?
For sure.
And so absolutely. And you've told me that story before, and I always love hearing it and hearing about how she sat down and demonstrated.
Yeah.
Well,
I should mention also, Frank, that
Yeah.
Salt Lake City, to any students out there who feel like it's a challenge to get to your lesson to drive across town, Salt Lake City is 300 miles from my hometown of Blanding. So to get to a lesson was quite a project. I didn't go every week. And Mrs. Rosenberg was so wonderful to be very flexible. Sometimes I would call her up the night before and say, I've found a ride to Salt Lake City. Can I have a lesson tomorrow? And she would clear her schedule. Sometimes she would give me a 2-hour lesson. So throughout my high school years, it was, I have to say, a bit sporadic. I guess I averaged once a month for lessons. But sometimes they were 2 lessons. I had relatives who lived in the area, so I'd go and stay the night, maybe have 2 lessons over 2 days. And sometimes I'm amazed that I actually survived that experience, being sporadic during my crucial formative years as a teenager. But whenever I have a student say, I had to drive 30 minutes to get here to my lesson today, I tell them, okay.
Okay. Just think about what I had to go through.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I've had students who have driven from Virginia to come down to take lessons, and for many young artists whose passion is music, they will go that extra mile, it seems, which is what you did, and I didn't know that it was 300 miles. That's an awful long car ride for sure.
Yep, sure enough.
Well, you one of the fascinating things when I first met you at Meredith College is to learn about your history and connection with South Korea. Could you enlighten us a little bit and share some of those connections?
Well, sure. If you'll indulge me, I send out notice about this to some of my friends in Korea. So can I give a little greeting to them?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. 한국에서 듣고 계시는 친구들한테 안녕하세요. 환영합니다. Okay, so thank you. In case anybody in Korea is listening, they've just been welcomed to the show. So anyway, Korea. I went there as a 19-year-old young man as a missionary for my church. I lived there for 2 years and learned to speak the language pretty well, and came home, and kind of my connection with Korea ended at that point for about 25 years. I lost a lot of my language skill. But then when I came to Meredith College, I found a very supportive environment there for faculty travel. And also the Triangle is home to several thousand Korean Americans. And so I started to get some Korean students and had opportunities to revive my Korean skills. And so I decided, hey, I should try to get some professional activities going in Korea. So I did have contact with some classmates from Indiana University who were back in Korea now. And I thought, well, it's let me see if I can set some stuff up. So starting in 2004, I started going back to Korea. I've been back now several times. The most recent significant stay was in 2017 for a sabbatical. I got invited to be a guest visiting professor at a women's university, appropriately enough. Meredith College, of course, is a women's college, and I was invited for a month-long guest residency at Sungmyung Women's University, and that was a wonderful opportunity. I just there was a class of master's degree students in piano pedagogy, about 30 students, I think it was, and we just spent the month together. I would talk to them about all kinds of different topics, and then alternating with master classes, which were basically all day long lessons. One student after another would come up while the rest of the class watched. And I tried to do a lot of my teaching in Korean. That was a real challenge for me sometimes, but the students were all very accommodating and patient with that. And that was, and then I've been back a couple of times. More recently in 2018, I was invited to come and give the keynote lecture at their National Pedagogy Conference. And that lecture was centered on the use of technology in teaching. I'm a big user of the iPad with different apps for teaching, and that was the subject of my lecture there. It was fun. I was able to tap into a piano academy of one of the teachers I had worked with at the Women's University, and she had a couple of little volunteer students who came up on stage in front of that big audience, and they helped me demonstrate the use of some of these apps in a real life teaching situation. It was lots of fun. And so I have a real strong connection with Korea. I hope some of my Korean friends are watching this morning. And well, Korea is, I think most of us are aware, it produces some of the finest pianists in the world right now. Oh my goodness. Every international competition, there's Koreans winning or in the top finalists. And it's just inspiring to see the level of enthusiasm that there is for piano in South Korea.
Yeah, the one thing that I'm so inspired by is just listening to how accurately that they can play, and that has a lot to do with their training and their focus. Just dedication to it. You mentioned earlier about, pardon me, your work in graduate school. You went to Indiana University, right? Is that for your master's and doctorate?
And doctorate, yeah, both. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Could you share some specific memories of your graduate study?
Well, my teacher there was Mr. James Toko, and I was with him for, I guess, almost 6 years, the 2 years of the master's degree, and then 4 years of the doctorate. And then he went to the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music, but I was more or less finished with my formal training at that point. Leonard Hokanson was another teacher there that I did some work with. He and Mr. Toko had sort of an agreement that they would teach each other's students if the need arose. So I did have a few lessons with Leonard Hokanson. So yeah, Indiana, of course, is a famous school. It's huge. It's very competitive. There's extremely talented people everywhere. The practice rooms are constantly going with people practicing. You had to, Dylan will know this, you had to wait in line overnight in Mrs. Krause's lounge to sign up for practice time. And if you weren't there at your practice time, boy, you were out of luck. You had to be there. It was just a very highly disciplined environment. And of course, very important for kind of finishing my professional training to be there in school with people like Dylan and others, just to be inspired by the talent that I saw all around me. But one of my, of course, my piano teachers were very inspiring, but I remember one course in particular that was taught by Thomas Matheson. He's not a pianist, he's a musicologist, and he taught a course on Schumann, Robert Schumann, and a summer course. Mm-hmm. And I still remember that course so vividly. We spent the entire summer studying practically everything Schumann wrote. And this Thomas Matheson was a brilliant, brilliant person. He had such a mind for music, a memory for music, and he could talk on practically any subject. His specialty was Greek music theory. That was his specialty. He'd written articles and articles about that, but he could also talk about Schumann. He could talk about C.P.E. Bach. He could name Wotken numbers of C.P.E. Bach symphonies. I mean, it was crazy.
Yeah.
And just to see somebody that brilliant was, it really stood out in my memory as is quite an amazing thing.
Yeah, I've got a couple of professors likewise that had such a encyclopedic mind at both undergraduate and graduate level. There was one professor at Temple University. I never saw this, but is reported that he could look at the grooves on an album, a vinyl album, for anyone who knows what that is, a record player, right? And he could tell you what piece was being played or what was being stamped on that vinyl album. I mean,
that's freakish.
That is insane. Yes, exactly.
Freakish ability.
But I mean, I mean, if anyone who has ever looked at a vinyl album, you can see the different groove depths, and I mean, if you know your repertoire, you could probably tell how certain grooves would produce certain, pitches and volumes and different sections.
That reminds me of a game that we used to play and in grad school. All us piano geeks, you'd hold your hands in the air in a certain shape and say, "What's this piece?" It's the starting chord of a piece. And if you really know your repertoire, you go, yes, that's
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking Chopin Etude right now.
Okay. Right, you got it.
Exactly. There's that first chord, right? And it's like everyone knows that chord who studied Chopin or any sort of lover of piano music. Well, another connection that you and I have had in the past has been through the North Carolina Music Teachers Association.
Right.
I'm very, very glad that you will be the upcoming president very soon. But one of the duties of being a president is the duties of being the president-elect. And, I've been in that position as well, and it's almost more challenging to be the president-elect. There's more duties for the president-elect. I guess it's in training, right?
Yes.
And then you sort of sit back and during your presidency and just allow things to happen. Well, not really, but being president-elect, the primary duty is to coordinate all of the details around our organization's annual conference. And this past year, which was your first conference coordination, is that right?
Yes.
It's a two-year appointment. You didn't have the luxury of going to a particular school and walking through to try to find practice rooms and lecture halls and performance spaces. You had to do everything online.
That's true.
And it was phenomenal. I think you can still find the conference on the ncmta.org website.
I think so.
I think that they're still up and available. And wow, I just want to say congratulations for that. But give us a little bit of information in what what you had to encounter with that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was quite an experience. Of course, everything got canceled this past year, starting with the pandemic in March. And within a few weeks after the start of the pandemic, we had an NCMTA board meeting and discussed what our options might be. It was pretty clear that an in-person conference wasn't going to be possible. So the decision was made to do a virtual conference. And I would say the most crucial thing for me was to get a great committee appointed. Frank, you were on that committee, you'll remember. Mm-hmm. And we had 5 other people who would have played key roles in a live conference. And I said, let's just get those people together and we will build the virtual conference. And that's what we did. So it was really a team effort. I just value so much the input that everybody had on that conference. And also our webmaster, Kathy Kreplin, she was really amazing as far as putting together a very attractive conference. It was very easy to negotiate. We got great response from our NCMTA members at putting in proposals. Dylan was one of the presenters there. And the content went up. All of the concerts, the performances by students went up. Frank, you had a role to play in that. Our MTNA competitors, their performances are all available. And we feel like it was a really good success. One of the most successful components, I thought, was we made the online content available on a Saturday last October, but invited everybody to come back after a week of looking at that content for live Q&A sessions with the presenters. And that's an element that is often missing from an online event. I know the MTNA National Conference had to pivot very quickly to a virtual format, and I don't recall that there was an interactive component available for that. And so we were very glad to be able to offer that. And of course, I was involved in every minute of the conference and watched everything. And I was very pleased with the final product. But looking forward to hopefully having a live conference this coming fall. We'll see how that plays out.
Right. That's still being decided. It's a little early, I think. Right?
Well, it's a wait and see, seeing
Absolutely.
how the vaccine gets rolled out and what decisions are made by colleges and universities. So, it's a strange time.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And again, this is sort of the reason why the PANC Live took birth, was using technology in some form or fashion. And, the mother of invention, right? I would like to welcome Dylan back to the show. I want to apologize, Dylan, for bringing you accidentally. Occasionally, I hit the wrong button, and you're just sitting there so dutifully and just, and I apologize to everyone, and especially to you for surprise. You're on the you're a candid camera all of a sudden. For anyone who knows what that reference is. Well, the reason I thought of having both of you together, and we only have a few more minutes left, is the two of you have a little history together. And could you two talk a little bit about that and your history and how you guys met?
I would...
Well, okay, Dylan was first, so let's go ahead,
Dylan.
Well, our graduate careers paralleled one another. We both did masters and doctorates together. I think I met Kent actually and this is very interesting, in the studio of Camilla Williams, and she was the first African-American singer to play the lead role in Madame Butterfly, and she was an amazing person. So we got to know each other because we're constantly playing for students in her studio as accompanists. And then we've had some classes. But literally we went shoulder to shoulder through the entire program together. And so if I may say, that's from the mid 80s. So that takes us back.
It's been a long time. Yeah. Camilla's studio was it was a gathering place. She had an open door policy, and you never had a lesson alone in there. There was always a half a dozen people sitting in there just listening to her teach. Wow. Talk about a person who had mastered and perfected their vocal technique. I think she kept singing long after Dylan and I left. I think the last concert I heard of her doing was she was about 85, I believe. And people said she still sounds like it's just crystal clear, her technique. So that was another big part of my musicianship training, was listening to someone with such mastery of technique and the beautiful singing tone. Yeah. Anna, I think, was Michel Bloch, who was your teacher, right? I didn't have him except in piano lit classes. Right. Yeah, I think smoking was still allowed.
Yes.
Then, am I right? And he had this cigarette in a cigarette holder, and just smoke, and the clouds of smoke and he would just talk in such nonchalant and suave terms. But what was he like working in the lesson in the studio?
Well, just very briefly, it's just a musicianship of just the highest order, and I learned so much about line and just a creative way of making music through him. But yeah, we didn't think about the smoke. I probably smoked quite a few packs of cigarettes studying with him secondhand, and
Yeah.
but it was a very different kind of lesson because there's a lot of talking as well, but a lot of connection to the music. It wasn't just sort of not. So sometimes a lesson would be, 50% playing and the other percent, talking about stuff that was equally important. But yes, an extraordinarily sophisticated and, a powerhouse of a mind.
Well,
Right.
this is absolutely fascinating. We are at the top of the hour, gentlemen. It's been so wonderful. It feels like that we could continue talking, but I know that all three of us have obligations that we have to go to. So I'd just like to thank both you, Dylan, and Kent, for joining me today. We may do another episode with the two of you, so kind of plant that seed. It would be so fascinating to continue the points and the conversations. I know, Kent, we didn't get to all of your questions in the time, and so there's plenty more to learn from both of you, and to be able to share with the wide world of piano. So I just want to say thank you both for joining me this morning. Be sure to follow the Piano Academy online in Facebook and in Instagram and on our YouTube channel. I just would like to say, Happy Chinese New Year 2021, and I hope you have a very happy Valentine's Day tomorrow. See you at the next show. Keep calm and keep practicing. The piano bench is large enough for everyone. Take care, folks.